Mayor, we are recording. Thank you.
All right, thank you and welcome everyone. It's Tuesday, the new year, January 5th, 2021. It's just after 5 p.m. This is the city of Cottonwood Heights. I'm Mayor Mike Peterson, and this is the work session for the city of Cottonwood Heights once again. I need to begin because we're doing this remotely to read a determination, and I'll read that now. And it states, pursuant to Utah Code annotated 524-2074, the city's mayor, as the chair of the city council, hereby determines that conducting the meeting of the city council on this date at an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. It is well recognized that a global pandemic currently exists related to the COVID-19 coronavirus, which has the potential to overwhelm Utah's healthcare system. Therefore, due to the state of emergency caused by the global pandemic, I find that conducting a meeting at the anchor location under the current state of public health emergency constitutes a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the location. Therefore, we are all online. I appreciate everyone's patience, and again, welcome and others who are listening in. If you will note on the agenda, the first item is a legislative update from our three lobbyists, Greg Curtis, Brian Allen, and Chantel Nate. So we'd like to turn the time over to you and share with us kind of what you're sensing, what you're feeling, and the council may have a few questions. So Greg, can we start with you?
Certainly. Thanks, Mayor. Well, I have to say in my 25 plus years that this is certainly going to be the most unique session. And they say that every year, but this one I think actually is going to be still trying to figure out exactly how we're going to meet and what it's going to entail. A lot of COVID modifications, etc. With that being said, the only thing that I'm aware of that I really engaged in right now is there's a lot of one-time money left in the budget. Last year with COVID, they essentially went into special session and took all of the growth out of the budget and said, let's just try and see what happens here. COVID hit certain industries very, very hard, but as far as an overall budget picture, it wasn't as draconian as they expected. So there's $1 billion plus of surplus type money. They're going to one-time monies. They'll be putting a lot of emphasis on some infrastructure funding. They don't have, the one thing about that is once that word kind of gets out there, $1 billion spends really fast. They have $10 billion worth of needs and risks, needs and assessments and asks. So with that, we will be trying to position ourselves for infrastructure funding. So
does infrastructure include roads?
Yes. Yeah, that would probably be one of the primary one-time expenses. I know there's been a certain push from higher ed that they need more buildings, but others have responded and said, well, you're not making a great case if we're doing all, I mean, and it's not their fault, but there's a whole bunch of distance learning going on at higher ed. And so the appetite to just say, let's build another $100 million building kind of runs counterintuitive on that. So
infrastructure projects also could that be, I mean, other types, underground type storm drains, water systems also included?
Yeah, but they're mostly, honestly, Councilman, they're mostly going to be looking at state level. And so they're going to say most of that stuff, I mean, if they were going to send something out to the state, they're going to say, we're going to either fund a state road or maybe some trails. I'm looking specifically at trailheads and on some property that has been acquired recently and, by Cottonwood Heights and Utah Open Lands and trailheads and stuff like that might facilitate access to the canyons and active transportation or active recreation and stuff like that.
Well, there may be a need, well, we'll talk to you more about it, but there'll be a need to discuss the idea of, like we deal with jurisdictional wetlands, there may be a need to take a piece of a property and trade a piece of a property to facilitate Wasatch Boulevard. So we really want to be available for those discussions with a net effect, hopefully being more open space. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I could would certainly be helpful to me would be some direction from the city in regards to priorities and rough amounts. Obviously, state road improvements, UDOT has their whole prioritization process. We'll be trying to work on some local funds also, in that regard. So yeah, some direction from the city would be helpful. And then the only other thing I would say is there's always there's a whole bunch of COVID legislation. There's a certain constituency of legislators who are working to try and, as they would say, quote, rein in the unchecked emergency powers, and how that floats through and translates down, will be ones that we'll want to keep an eye on, and a lot of that. So.
Yeah, well, one shoe doesn't fit all, so we definitely like to be in that discussion too, because what's happening locally is not the same maybe happening down south or up further north. So yeah, appreciate that discussion. Before we move to Brian, any
Sorry,
questions?
Mayor, can I just jump in?
Yeah, I was going to assume
The one shoe doesn't fit all comment though, where I don't know that I agree with you is when we have rural constituents that then need to come and use our hospitals. So when we talk about as a state, a one size doesn't fit all, when it starts impacting our hospitals and the availability of beds by not having a one size fits all approach, it's killing us right now. So I think as a council, we should all decide how we want to support that legislation, because Tim and I will be meeting on Mondays to determine, raise our hands as to what we agree to and don't agree to. And I don't want to vote the way I want to vote, which may not be the way the full council wants to vote.
Yeah,
Well,
my point of bringing that up was when Mayor Wilson was advocating masks, the legislature and people up north were advocating not to have it. So I was taking the position that we may need masking in our community, okay? And even when the legislature says, well, they don't support it. I was thinking more of that line, but I hear what Christine's saying, and that is that we need to be sensitive to the whole state, yeah.
Well, and I think the reality of it is we don't, I would assume that the position to be is just don't limit our authority, because anything that you see from the legislature is going to be an attempt to say we're going to limit your ability to regulate masks, to regulate time, to regulate certain restrictions on businesses. And Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County were a lot more aggressive early on, especially than some of the other areas. So I think the underlying principle would be is let us kind of govern, because if the legislature determines one size fits all, it's going to be a much broader than what you've seen. All you need to do is go vacation in a small rural county, and you walk into a restaurant wearing a mask and you are the alien in the restaurant. So, it's sometimes a little bit different perception.
Yeah, but I appreciate that perspective and Christine's perspective. But my point is that we may want to be more aggressive than some other areas. We want that right. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments, questions to Greg? And I heard Greg's, of course, request for us, Tim, to give him more direction as we go forward with respect to infrastructure, trails, open space, and what opportunities present itself there. Yeah.
Yeah, Mayor, may I make a comment?
Please.
So last year, during the session, there was a lot of discussion about the trails and what projects would be were ready, basically project ready to move forward. We provided that information. A lot of it was associated with the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and acquisition for that, and then building. We have the numbers on that. We have that information we provided. Tonight, definitely, we would like council's direction on what those priorities would be for the funding elements, but I think that's a good start as far as trails and the things that we put together last year because of that momentum that was starting to build with the Speaker of the House. So anyway, before we end tonight, I would really love the council to weigh in on that, but that would be a good place to start, in my opinion.
I have a question, Greg, for you. Is that in the queue for us already for this allocation of money that we do have? Is that already in the queue? And then do we need to give you additional things that we can get in the queue for that?
No, it's not really not. I mean, the queue in the sense of there was a lot of discussion, and they were asked, municipalities and others were asked to submit, projects, but that bonding package and that funding never came together. And so, we would need to, it's kind of like we all got in a line. Shouldn't say we got in a line. It's kind of like shopping at, what do they call Black Friday and rushing into Walmart. We're all there ready to run in and try and grab a piece of the money. And then they essentially announced, hey, we're staying closed for another day or another year or whatever. So it never was spent. And so the queue's not, it's all back to kind of square one in that sense.
We're starting over again. I just wanted to clarify that. That's good to know.
Well, as Tim mentioned, one of our priorities is we're already committed to the Bonneville shoreline. We've spent money. And so anything associated with that, we may look for opportunities we don't even recognize right now that you'll see in the session where we can be creative and create a win-win for UDOT and for the city. So looking for those opportunities would be important. And of course, if they allocate some other monies to through the state for open space acquisition and stuff like that, which is regional in nature, yeah.
So Greg, I guess I have a question. So when you say that most of it's going to go to transportation, like large projects, you mentioned state roads, is it primarily UDOT putting a package together? Is it more of a bonding package where they're going to say, so they can get, $3 million worth of projects for $1 billion? You know what I mean? Like, can you maybe?
Well, no. So UDOT has their prioritization list, and they already put out, and they say this is our list, and et cetera. And they proudly profess that it has no politics involved, and nobody believes that but them. And so the reality of it is the legislature is the one that has to put the money associated with that. UDOT has their yearly budget allotment that comes, and they'll just keep working through their lists and they tweak that with the Transportation Commission as they need to. But this would be the legislature coming in and saying, we're either putting bonding authorization to you and or one-time appropriation of some of this $1 billion, and then saying, here, do this. But what you'll see coming out of the legislature is one of them that's had a lot of conversation is double tracking, what they're calling double tracking certain segments of commuter rail to make the head times much more efficient. Okay. And the reality of it is that's number one on UTA's list, but I don't think it's on anybody's list. Well, I shouldn't say anybody's. It's not on very many lists up at the Capitol, but there's some very strong supporters who are talking about that. That one is going to have some legislative direction to be funded. And so with that, there have been others. Senator Hemmert, who has left the Senate and is now working in GOED, was a big proponent of the gondola and was working on that. I don't know if that will have as much momentum, but there have been a lot of discussion about that, about gondola in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And so things like that will be the ones where the legislature starts weighing in. People will want to say, well, I'm not going to participate or support any kind of budgetary effort short of getting my project identified and or funded, et cetera. And so those will be the discussions that will take place. Whether it's all one-time money or a combination of one-time money and bonding is yet to play out based upon the size of the package.
Like from your perspective, I mean, this list, I don't know if it's, like you said, a legislative list. Where do you think Wasatch Boulevard falls on that list? And what things can we do with our various legislators to influence if there is money allocated to Wasatch Boulevard? How do we ensure that we get what we want, which is like, you know, I think UDOT in our newsletter yesterday talked about how, you know, they're going to dictate the speed limit based on the studies, but how can we influence it so that we can get what we want and, you know, lessen the impact to our community if they're going to do that? It seems to me that the only way we can do that is through the purse strings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, clearly, I mean, legislatively, if we wanted to direct money towards that, then we would need our legislators to say, hey, I want to try and direct some money towards that. Okay. Obviously, the bigger the size of the project, the harder it is. Okay. I don't recall exactly. I know that the canyon monies that were allocated some years ago covered Wasatch Boulevard at least down to Big Cottonwood Canyon and going south, you know, but there's not nearly enough. Whatever they're going to do, whether it's gondola, bus passing lanes, third lanes, the $60 or $70 million they have won't go very far. And so, so requesting more and advocating to accelerate that is all appropriate. But I don't know what one.
And the EIS process won't be done until after the legislative session.
Right. And that's one of the things UDOT has been saying is, and they were saying this during the fall or during the late summer in August when they were talking about possibility of special session. UDOT was saying, it's not done. We don't want it. Don't give us any money. And then there was some pushback, I think, primarily by Senator Hemmert saying, well, I'm not going to, there's not an unlimited pot of money. And if they bond for $2 billion and they take that headroom out of the potential future bonding, then Senator Hemmert was saying, I'm not going to bond and spend $2 billion. And then when something that's important to me gets an EIS next year and they say, oh, it's going to be $300 million. You say, oh, well, there's no headroom. We spent all of it. Okay. And so that was one of the reasons I think the bond kind of faltered a little bit last summer. And so it'll be interesting to see how those discussions play out in regards to large projects.
But I'm hearing that the bond discussion is alive and well right now.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I guess it'd be helpful. I don't want to take up your time now. I know we've got a lot to talk about, but maybe we could have another conversation about how we as a city, if that money is going to go there, how can we influence the things that we need for our constituents?
Yeah.
That was my question as well, Greg, is this a situation we sit down and get our best bets through you and Brian and see what to up our odds on some of these projects?
Well, yeah, that's why I need a list. I mean, you know, the idea of saying, okay, local roads, trails, state roads, what would be, you know, if they hypothetically said to Cottonwood Heights, here's $50 million, okay, would you say, I want that improved, I want Fort Union Boulevard improved, or I want Wasatch Boulevard improved? Okay, it doesn't do any good to go up there and say, well, we want 100 and we want both. Okay.
Well, but it's my understanding they're not going to give Cottonwood Heights any money. They're going to give it to UDOT with guardrails of how they can expend it. So I think it's a multifaceted approach using Greg Curtis and Brian Chantel, but also working with UDOT and working on several fronts. But
we need to involve our legislators. I mean,
yep.
You know, Senator Reedy, Senator Collimore,
yep.
You know, representatives. Yeah. So, I mean,
yeah. And I think Senator Collimore is going to be someone who's going to be directly associated with transportation is my understanding. Yeah.
Well, he currently chairs that infrastructure,
yep.
You know, and so he has some direct involvement with that. So, yeah.
Well, as Christine said, I know we don't have a lot more time, but we will be communicating weekly with our various legislators and our lobbyists and with the council to make sure our priorities are succinct with what potentially is available for us. Yeah.
I would just add, obviously, some of the things that we've asked for and we would like to see on Wasatch are more likely to happen if there is more than just the least amount of money possible to do a project for simply improvement. And so I don't know, we would certainly be turning anything down.
Right, I understand. Sometimes UDOT, the enhancements that a community would like to see, UDOT pushes back hard on saying, okay, we're going to do what they refer to as betterments, and negotiate.
And they've told us that they're open to doing betterments on their dime with us and with Parksy, now with some others, and we would like to hold them to that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Exactly. And that's why we have a master plan. We want to, again, continue to reaffirm their acceptance of that plan. But as we've heard in the past, they'll, when John Thomas was here, we got some commitments and they start backing off a bit. We have to keep pushing to reaffirm those commitments. So we will do that.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Brian, Chantel, your perspectives on other things that are happening?
Well, we'll have the usual suspects that are out there. I know that Scott Sandel has a outdoor advertising bill. Basically, it's allows the billboard companies to upgrade a sign from a paper sign to an electronic sign. If it meets certain criteria, and I think the criteria it's 150 feet from a residential property, and it also would prohibit a city from forcing a billboard company to give up a sign somewhere else to do an upgrade on a sign. So you couldn't trade an upgrade for getting rid of a sign. So I think some cities, I don't think we've done this, but I think some cities have said to billboard companies, we'll let you upgrade, but you've got to get rid of a sign somewhere else. So they've got 10 signs, they want to upgrade one, would take them down to 9 signs. And this bill would prohibit that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion with the league on that bill. We haven't not discussed it yet. I know it's on their radar. I've talked with Cam Deal about it. So that's out there. Corey Malloy has refiled his firearms preemption bill, making the state the only person that can regulate how firearms are used, and also putting in civil penalties for cities if they pass an ordinance that doesn't meet the state test. So that bill is very problematic. We've had discussions with him about it in the past. He agreed to drop it the last time we talked to him about it, but it has now come back, which we kind of expected it would. He didn't say he would drop it forever. He was just going to drop it for that session, which he did, but it's still got a lot of work that needs to be done. There are a number of bills on local, planning and use ordinances. Most of them right now are bill file titles. We don't have exact language in there. I know there's around the affordable housing discussion, there's a lot of interest in doing something with affordable housing in the legislature. And there are a couple of bills, I've talked with Ray Ward about his bill that would allow for people to accessory dwelling, not accessory dwelling, it's allowing someone to rent space within your existing home.
Yeah, ADUs.
Was
Yeah,
that?
it is. They call them accessory dwellings.
Sounds like
Maybe-
renting a bedroom, not a whole unit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, like renting your basement or doing something like that, and putting some guardrails around what cities can do as far as requirements go. One of the big issues is parking, that everybody is concerned about parking, and Ray Ward's kind of opinion on that as well. If you have a family with 6 kids and they're all driving, how could that be any worse than having an older couple that rents to a younger couple that has 1 car? That he doesn't see the difference, and so he's looking for ways to get to make it easier for people to rent parts of their house out. The owner would have to be present, so the owner couldn't be an absentee owner. It couldn't be like you're renting your whole house out. You have to The owner has to live there. And so they think that's a check against any nefarious behavior. So there's a couple of bills like that out there. Ray Ward's is the only one that's actually got language in it right now. Or at least language that I've seen. So there's some of that happening. There are some interesting.
How about police reform issues?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. So there are some interesting bills on police reform, and that was the word I was trying to come up with, is the reform. So there are a number of bills. One of the bills that I'm not sure where the legislature's at on it, but Angela Romero has a bill that it would define what use of force means and how it's reported. One of the challenges that the legislature has had is trying to figure out how many incidents of force there are. If you look at the actual numbers that are out there, they're pretty low, but they're all over the charts as far as how use of force is being defined by a municipality or a county or any law enforcement agency. So Angela Romero wants to define what use of force means so that everybody's reporting the same way, and I think it would give a much clearer picture. I don't know what the merits of her bill are. I'd have to have Robbie or somebody look at it that would understand more what like the FBI guidelines are and that type of thing. But she does want to create a standard, and I think that bill probably has a pretty good chance of passing. There are a number of other bills on the use of canines and certifying officers that use canines, there are bills related to citizen review boards and transparency on disciplinary action. One bill that I saw a couple of days ago that I read had to deal with an officer is voluntarily leaves a department during an investigation for misconduct. The city would have to, or the law enforcement agency would have to report to Post that there was an ongoing investigation, and in some cases Post would then pick up that investigation and complete it. So I guess what's happened in the past is some officers have left positions in the middle of investigations, and then it doesn't really follow them, and then they get picked up somewhere else and no one knows about it. So they want to make sure there's some information out there about that. So there are a number of bills around law enforcement reform. Most of them don't have language yet, but I think a lot of them, I think you'll see, there are a lot of them that look similar and sound similar. So you'll probably have a number of them consolidate into a single bill, but there's going to be a lot of discussion on that. There's still a lot of appetite for some reform there, I think, at the legislative level with some legislators. And so I think we'll see a lot of discussion around those issues as well. But and then, the usual, there's some water bills that are circulating around. And again, just the land use stuff, impact fees, the development community is still a little bit concerned about some of the impact fees and some of the rules around, that cities, there's just not a lot of consistency, and they're wanting to get some more. So I think I will just echo what Greg said. When the legislature is passing a bill, it's not going to be able to, it's not giving cities more authority. It's going to be taking some authority away. So we'll have to, that's just the nature of the beast. So we'll have to be diligent on that. And I think, again, I want to echo, what Greg said too about, the COVID stuff. I mean, there's going to be some bills around that. And, we were in St. George for a couple of days over New Year's, and the trails in Snow Canyon were so busy, we put our masks on. There were so many people, and we heard somebody say, "Yeah, those people must be from California. They're wearing masks." I'm just like, yeah, maybe, but I mean, mine was a University of Utah mask, so how they could mistake me for a Californian, I don't know. But anyway, so I mean, there is a lot of inconsistency around the state on how people view that, and I will tell you that you drive by the malls in St. George and the parking lots are packed. You drive by the malls here and they're empty. So there's a whole different attitude in various parts of the state about how this whole COVID thing is shaking out, and that that will be interesting to see how they deal with that going forward at the legislative level, because it's very different. I mean, how people deal with it and think about it around the state. So I'll be interested.
I had a quick question. I'm curious if there's been any thought or you've heard anything about the anchor location and our meetings. I mean, obviously, a lot of places have gone to Zoom live type things. I mean, the reality is right now I'm showing we've got 15 people in the audience, and we never had that when we had a only live meeting type of a thing. Have you heard any bills about any alterations to that once the state of emergency is left out or foregone?
No, I mean, there's a couple of bills with general titles about open meetings, but we haven't seen anything. And I would guess that there will be some appetite going forward for a virtual access all the time, even when we're able to meet in person again, because it does make it easier for people to attend who don't want to necessarily come to the city hall or can't get away or are out of town but still want to participate. So I mean, I don't know that there's going to be any legislative mandate to do that, but I think there's definitely going to be some encouragement to do that. I know at the legislative level this session, and Greg knows this as well, that we've been given, some, really encouragement to try to do as much as we can virtually and not be up at the Capitol and be there in person. And I don't know really how that's going to work. I've talked to a number of legislators, and they're more than happy to do virtual meetings with us. And they really are trying to discourage people from being at the Capitol because they are concerned. And, the vaccine rollout hasn't happened yet. So really for a large portion of the population. And so it's going to be a little bit, I think, people are a little bit nervous up there. And Megan, my daughter-in-law Megan is the chief clerk, and she said that they're having a lot of really hard discussions about how they're going to manage it all, because they are very concerned. I mean, they are really concerned about having an outbreak at the Capitol and getting people sick, and they're going to do everything they can to try to mitigate that, but they're trying to really encourage people to go to do the virtual thing. And so we're going to try to do that to the extent that we can. I mean, there's some meetings you just have to do in person.
And my comment was long-term, what can we do to?
Long-term, I haven't seen any bill that would mandate virtual meetings going forward, but I don't know. I don't know that there wouldn't be anything to discourage it, obviously, but I don't know that there's going to be anything that's going to require it. I haven't seen anything yet.
Well, we'll have a lot more conversation. Maybe you can share with us, we're running out of time on this subject, but how is LPC going to function this year with COVID?
So they are doing all virtual meetings. So they'll be meeting on Mondays at noon. It's all going to be done virtually. They're not going to be meeting at the Capitol. They've canceled local officials day at the request. The legislature's not hosting any large scale events. There's not any of that. So Realtor Day, any of those days that are usually done at the Capitol where they have displays and everything, that's all done. That's gone for this year.
Mayor, in addition to that, Councilmember Michael and I have been attending the meetings virtually, and that's been occurring. But the other thing, the key this year is really going to be contacting our legislators and really focusing on keeping them informed with what our issues are. And that's what the league is really pushing as part of LPC as well.
Yeah, and we've talked to all of them, and we're going to be, engaging with them probably on a daily basis to give them an update on where things are at and what we're seeing and what we're hearing and how the city views things. So it's going to be, it's going to a lot be like what we did in person. We're just going to be doing it virtually.
Well, thank you to both of you. And I agree with Tim that meeting with our local legislators is a priority. And I know we've already reached most of those and had some meetings. We'll continue to do that. And we'll stay in touch weekly and give you whatever feedback and direction we can to facilitate you in representing us. So any final comments from anyone regarding our legislative efforts?
Mayor, just one thing. So on the funding, and we'll talk more about this as the session moves forward and giving Greg direction, but I put in my memo with the staff report that obviously the the trail and open space opportunities, some of the things we put together last year with the Bonneville shoreline as far as project ready or acquisition is something we would look at. And then things facilitating from state road funds, the Wasatch Boulevard and things that will help to mitigate traffic. Those are the types of things that I think we want to look at for funding. Am I correct in that, just for clarification?
I think you're correct. And then two, if Greg sees an opportunity to be creative, if ever funds can be used to magnify amounts that we have in other areas, like Scott mentioned, stormwater, anything else, even if it's stormwater off Wasatch, we'll talk about that later, but any other creative things. But yeah, I think our understanding of one of the few areas where we can get some help. Yeah. All right. Brian, Chantel, Greg, thank you very much. We won't make you stay around. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, moving ahead on your agenda is a review of tonight's business meeting. And what we have, of course, is the pledge and acknowledgements. And let me say right now, and I forgot a moment ago, we need to excuse Tally Bruce this evening, who is ill, and send our best wishes to her for a quick recovery. But I failed to do that a few moments ago, but we definitely want to excuse her, and I'll do it again at the business meeting. We have citizen comments. We have two staff quarterly reports, our police report and our public works report, and we'll have those at that time. We have two action items. One is an agreement with the Department of Transportation regarding drainage that comes off above Wasatch and impacts Wasatch Boulevard. So Matt, you want to talk about that just real quickly, an introduction? I think there's not a fiscal note to it. It's just a cooperation agreement.
Yeah, not a fiscal note attached to this. We have been putting stormwater onto this place for about the last 40 years. It's located roughly just south of Russell Park Road on the east side. And it's something we found through our work and talked to UDOT, and they'd like to have an agreement on that.
Yeah, I read through that information. It seems like a no-brainer, but we'll have you, any questions on what that is by the council?
It sounded like this is a temporary action. Eventually, when they do whatever they're going to do with Wasatch, they'll make that a permanent situation.
That's correct. There's a couple of these along the way we'll probably see here in the next year or so.
I think we recognized it when it got covered up, and we uncovered it and been working with them on it. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Matt. Then we have two appointments to the Arts Council. Tim, do you want to introduce those, or Doug, do you want to talk about them? Either one.
Yeah, I can talk about that. It's only actually one. It's Carol Whitaker.
Oh, I thought it was two.
Yeah, it's Carol Whitaker, and she applied to serve on the Arts Council. I had the opportunity to sit down with her, well, virtually meet with her. Paula and Ann and I did, and she has great background. She's excited to serve. She's her resume is in the packet. She has education and dance in her background, and I think she'll be a great asset to the committee. So I'm recommending approval of her appointment.
Doug Peterson, any comments regarding that appointment?
I think she's very well versed in this. She's going to make a great addition to the team. The Arts Council we meet tomorrow night as well. And they're trying to get going. They're doing so many good things, even during this virtual everything. But they are planning on the play, Matilda auditions. We're just hoping that some of these restrictions are lowered. But I think she will make a great addition to an already strong team.
Great, thank you. All right, any questions on the business meeting tonight? Okay, let's move back to our work session. We have some staff reports. The first item is, as we talked, was introduced in our last work session, targeted residential picketing. I think we've talked about several cities across the state have introduced that, and it was looked at by our counsel, Shane Topham, and to make sure it was legal and would withstand challenges, and if it's something we wanted to consider. So Shane and Chief Russo, who wants to introduce it tonight?
I circulated a memo with the packet this week that
Right.
explained what I had looked at on this. There are, I think I said in the memo that I easily found about 6 or so different jurisdictions in the vicinity that had adopted such an ordinance. The ordinance complies with law in the United States, as announced by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Frisbee versus Schultz case. So in drafting this proposed ordinance, I just used as a pattern the ones that had been used in the other cities that had adopted them. I think that Riverton has taken a little bit more expansive approach of its ordinance, but the others are all pretty uniform, and so that's the approach that this ordinance that's before you utilized.
Robbie, comments?
Sure. To recap for those who are listening, it's what this is targeted residential picketing, and it prohibits it. You saw with Dr. Angela Dunn, she's not normally a political figure. She's just trying to do her job, and she found people outside of her home and intimidating her and her family. And across the country, you see this more and more often. And what this prohibits is targeting people in a safe place that should be their home. That's not normally a place where we should be allowing protests and intimidation of families. To me, it's not a peaceful protest. It's a form of harassment and threatening behavior to people in their homes. And we have plenty of places where people can air their concerns, and picket, and gives the police a tool in the toolbox to handle these when we get called to these homes or these neighborhoods. We have business leaders in the community, a lot of high-profile elected officials, and as I mentioned before, an international superstar, and just any citizen could be the target of this. And the police department supports it as it is now, and unless they're breaking some other law, there isn't a lot we can do. So we support this, and that's why I brought it forward. And I think it's important, and I'm glad Shane took the time to reinforce the legitimacy of it, and that it's constitutional to do that and would withstand any challenges. So we would ask for your support, and I don't know that it's something that I'm comfortable in waiting on. There could be civil unrest at any time, but any one of your homes or mine, and I think it's important that we keep our citizens safe, and this is a tool for the police department. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions from the council? I have a couple of questions, but I'll open it up to the council first.
I have a couple, Mayor, if I could.
Please.
Remind me in the resolution, what is the proximity, and is there an ingress egress situation on that, Shane? Maybe the limitations to that.
What the standard that's used in all of these ordinances is 100 feet from the property line.
That's it, just 100 feet.
That's the same question I have. 100 feet, if I think of the width of a lot in most of Cottonwood Heights, the frontage is probably 200 feet. And so if you're 100 feet away, in essence, it would still seem to be an impact. That seems pretty minimal.
Can that be increased, or is that another hoop to jump through to increase that? Because that would impact a neighbor if yours was the home that was intended. And so I just wonder if that has been, has precedence.
Oh, the Frisbee versus Schultz case, I think that the ordinance that they were examining there just talked about demonstrations in front of or about somebody's residence. And so the approach that's been used here in Utah, at least, is to use this 100-foot from the property line standard because the Supreme Court did not announce a particular number of feet. So that's by utilizing that 100-foot standard, why we would be the city of Cottonwood Heights would be adopting the same standard that's being used in all other communities in Utah that have adopted this type of ordinance.
Is that what Holiday used, was 100 feet?
Yes, all of them.
Further questions, comments?
Mayor,
You're on mute. You're on mute, Steve.
oh, sorry. I think the frontage on my house is about 80 feet. And I don't think I'm terribly outside the thing. I just was zooming over to your house, Mayor, to see where yours is about 70. So the 100 would be your neighbor's house, probably a little bit more, not half the neighbor's house.
Yeah.
For perspective, that's I was just a little surprised. So that's what I was looking at.
Yeah,
I didn't measure Doug's because he has a big house.
My previous house was 230 feet. That's why I was referring to that.
Oh.
Yeah,
Well, and we understand this is 100 feet from the property line of the residence, right?
yeah.
And that you normally, from our experience and the experience of other cities, is sufficient to dissuade people from being there, or
Yeah.
it's sufficient to protect people.
No, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
And I know from past experience, if the number 100 is consistent in most of the other ordinances, then you kind of want to stay within those guardrails. You don't want to go too far out, or you kind of become either a low-hanging fruit or the hammer or the nail that just wants to get hammered. So I'm fine with the 100 feet, if that's certainly what common practice is.
Again, the 100 feet in every ordinance that I found in Utah, it's a 100-foot standard.
Yep. And that was the question I had. And without clarification, that seems fine with me. Just at a quick glance, it didn't seem very far, but the more you talk about it, it seems appropriate.
Shane, in a nutshell, just real quick, did you say Riverton went more extensive on their verbiage, I guess? And so obviously it cost them more. Did they get any bang for that buck?
Yeah, well, they used essentially the same targeted residential picketing verbiage that the other Utah cities that we've discussed have used and that we're proposing to use in Cottonwood Heights. But that is just one component of a much bigger treatment of demonstrations and First Amendment rights and things like that. It's an entire chapter comprising, I don't know how many pages, 10 or so pages of code in Riverton, where they have tried to deal with things more extensively. I have not seen that approach be used in any other Utah city. So anyway, if again, Riverton has adopted essentially the same targeted residential picketing ordinances we're discussing for Cottonwood Heights, but it's a small part of a bigger chapter dealing with all sorts of related issues.
So what we're adopting sounds pretty much a standard. It sounds like that should work for us, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I don't know, hundreds of cities and towns in Utah. I have not done an exhaustive survey of all of them, but I've looked in the populated areas along the Wasatch Front and easily found you know, these 6 or 8 jurisdictions, including Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, neighboring city of Holiday, and so I think that what this ordinance proposes is not out of the norm.
Great. Thank you.
I think it's, as much as an elected official, you may feel that, I mean, there's that exemption we have where we need to be a little more open to what's going on, what we're called or what we're targeted or how we respond to emails. But when it gets to your home, it also, I was reminded very clearly by my wife, it's like, no, when it involves your family, it becomes different. So I'm quite supportive of the ordinance. I would like to see it put on our next meeting's agenda if we could do that.
I'm supportive for the simple reason that we provide an alternative location for it to happen. I think, with the rights of people to protest and show the concerns, I respect that. And we give them that option at City Hall, and I think that's very appropriate, and even in some other locations. But if it's in residential, targeted at a particular resident, I think that's inappropriate because we give them other means to express those concerns. So I'm supportive as well. Further comments, questions? Hearing none, we'll move on. We have just a little over an hour left in the work session. This next topic will take probably 30-40 minutes, and that's which was introduced in our last meeting regarding the north end of the gravel pit development. So Mike Johnson, I'll turn it over to you, and with the preface that we've stated in our last meeting that this discussion will take several meetings and will be different topics at each meeting. So let Mike kind of guide us through that, and appreciate the introduction as to what's already happened in the process, because, it's been months and months of work with the Planning Commission and staff and architect review and things before it's got to us. But I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll pull up a slideshow, but just for those listening, last time we presented just a high-level overview of the proposal. The site plan being proposed, the massing of the buildings and the renderings that were shown, and then we spent some time talking about the process to date. This went through Planning Commission hearings starting in June or July of 2020 through October, so 6 or 7 meetings, but the application came in well before that. So it's been over a year that we've been working on this in some capacity. And again, for those listening, and we've reiterated this a lot, we do have a website on the city webpage that has all of the current information for this proposal published and publicly available and kept up to date. So we encourage everyone to keep looking at that and check back for updates, and we'll do our best to make it easy to work through that. Tonight, I'm going to focus, I think the best way to do this is to kind of focus on particular aspects of this project with each meeting, and over the next handful of meetings we'll have presented kind of a complete project, then have time to discuss specific areas of interest or concern. So I'm going to start with this. This is our tentative roadmap for how we anticipate discussing this moving forward. Tonight we're going to focus primarily on ordinance and policy analysis. So that's, how does this proposal, as staff has analyzed it and as the commission and the Architecture Review Commission have weighed in on it, how does this proposal comply with applicable city ordinance, the general plan, the Wasatch Boulevard master plan, basically the goals of the city that are adopted that reference this project? How well does this project comply with those things? And I think that'll take most of the time tonight. So that's all I have planned. At the next meeting, we felt it would be helpful to have the Planning Commission chair meet with the council and share the Planning Commission's experience and perspective on it, and just kind of summarize what it went through there and some of the feedback there. And then moving into February, we'll get into the sensitive lands discussion. We want to spend a good chunk of time talking about that. Because there are a lot of sensitive lands challenges here and a lot of concern we understand. So we want to talk through what's being done there. And then that's when we'll start getting into, there were some questions and requests brought up by the council last time, and I assume there will continue to be. We're keeping track of all those and working on those, and we'll bring those back at a meeting to talk through all of those and and hopefully resolve the questions or concerns that the council has. Some of the things that have been brought up already was, building height comparisons with other projects. We've got information on that. I have it. I'm not planning to share it here tonight, but I certainly can provide the council with it. Some of the traffic concerns with Holiday City, the hillside reclamation, which we'll get into when we talk sensitive lands, trails and connectivity, and just, some of the other functions of this. Not scheduled yet, but things that need to happen. Obviously, we will hold official public comment for this in a business meeting at some point. And then obviously at the end of deliberation, we'll need a final decision by the council. But tonight I'll jump back and talk a little bit about the Plan Development District Ordinance in general, what it does and why it's a little different than other development projects that come through the city. And then I'll get into a policy analysis after that. And we'll probably come back to this and update this, but this right here, I think this was requested at one point. This is a very preliminary comparison of what you can see in a planned development district that and what you would see in a mixed use zoning area. I chose mixed use because that's the land use designation on this property. Obviously, it's been, kind of targeted as a PDD type area. So we fully anticipated use of the PDD here, but using conventional zoning, the mixed use ordinance would be the most likely here. So this is just a very, this isn't everything, not a full comparison, but just some highlights of the differences between the two. Obviously, you have a substantial difference with building height in the PDD. The maximum height is dependent on how far away you are from Wasatch Boulevard, but ranges from 50 feet up to 300 feet. In the mixed use zone, you're capped at a maximum height of 45 feet. So much different there. Setbacks in the PDD are very flexible, and as proposed, you've got standard setbacks in your mixed use ordinance. There's more parking flexibility. There's stronger recommendations in the PDD to develop projects that utilize shared parking. So you have uses that, one use could be busy during business hours and one use may be busier at night, like an office in a hotel, retail, a hotel, something like that. In the mixed use, it's just if each use on a project has to meet minimum parking standards, and you look at every use as an individual thing, and you don't get that opportunity as much to consolidate or share parking. There's greater open space requirements in the PDD area, 25% as opposed to 15%. And then PDD does have reference to public amenities as well, whereas the mixed use ordinance does not. Residential density, I think it's important when we talk density, we're only talking residential density in either case. In the mixed use ordinance, it's 35 units per acre. There is no maximum density in the PDD. It's just, whatever the building code dictates is allowed to be constructed within the setbacks and height limitations. And then we have that affordable housing requirement that you're all aware of in the PDD that we do not have in other city zones. We measure building height differently. I'll just kind of touch on these quickly. We developed site-specific architectural design standards in the PDD, where in the mixed use we just use the city's standard design guidelines. The PDD, the major difference is it's a legislative action, so it's a rezone, but you also see a site master plan at the same time. In the mixed use ordinance, the council would see the rezone, but there's no commitment for the actual proposed development at that point. That would then come in later and only go through planning commission for approval. Yeah, go ahead.
Make a quick comment. I noted building height is different.
Yeah.
But I also noted that the PDD has it set for, in this case, from Wasatch Boulevard, and there's quite a bit of natural grade up. I would expect that 45 feet taken at the back of that property. I don't know how well it would conform, but it would be a lot more than 300 feet from Wasatch Boulevard. I'd hate people to misconstrue that it's going to be a 300-foot building when that's probably not the case as it would be in most other zones.
Yeah, so the 50 to 300 here, that's the maximum heights. Even the tallest building, the 13-story building, does not come close to 300 in this case. This is just the maximum allowed. And at that maximum, you have to be something like, I don't know off the top of my head, but hundreds of feet away from Wasatch Boulevard, back into the hillside there pertaining to the gravel pit. But we would use that average. We take an average elevation along the frontage of Wasatch Boulevard, and that would become the grade, the Wasatch Boulevard grade from which we would be measuring. So whether the site is graded up or down once you get into the project, we're still basing it on that Wasatch Boulevard level rather than right where it sits in its position.
Mike,
Yeah.
a question, and I don't want to take too much time, let you finish through, but for me, going back to when we created PDD, that one item, which is the maximum height, was always a concern. And it's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the 300 feet, which is the maximum height, is not a right. Okay, it's still subject to what we get to determine what height we feel best fits that site.
Yeah, I think you're correct. There's language in the PDD that references, the council and the planning commission need to review the proposal, and the development should fit well within the context of the site and the surrounding area. So those are some factors that will need to be looked at is, whatever's being proposed, is it in context with where it's located in the site and what's surrounding it and the impact it has.
Thank you.
So we can come back to this anytime or update it. I am posting these presentations on that project webpage after every work session. So last meeting's work session presentation is on there. I'll do the same here. I'm going to keep moving. Just a kind of a really high level overview of what the planned development district is. I'll be brief here, but it's a new ordinance that governs a very specific and defined area of land. What we're really doing here is rezoning a piece of property, but along with that rezone, we're creating a written ordinance that applies only to that area that's being rezoned. So it's a planned development zone where you come in with a development plan, you create a zone that supports it, and it applies only to the property that you're working with. So what that means is the city ordinance we have, the planned development district ordinance, that just guides the creation of a planned development zone. What the council's considering at the end of the day is a new planned development zone that will apply only to this northern parcel of the gravel pit and will only ever be applicable there, and is exactly what needs to be built there. So we create a new zone and we create a new ordinance specific to this site. In addition to that, we attach a handful of different plans, master plans, and connectivity plans and circulation plans that become part of that written ordinance. So everything you see that's packaged together becomes code and becomes law that moving forward, we will implement on the property. So the PDD is different than most zoning ordinances in that it only applies to this specific location. And it includes development plans up front with the rezone rather than at the development phase. Each phase then will come in for further development approval, but you see the plans up front, whereas a standard rezone, you don't see the plans and you don't necessarily know the use up front at this level. So here's some of the goals and objectives of the ordinance. It was created really as a redevelopment tool to target specific areas in the city. One being the gravel pit, another being the major nodes or intersections along the Fort Union Boulevard corridor. Different standards apply in the different areas, but really the PDD at the end of the day was a planning tool that was created to help better implement some of the city's master planning goals by creating some flexibility with development to, with the ultimate intent to create a better product than you could potentially get using standard zoning. The trade-off obviously is the more involved process and some of the extra requirements involved. And that's what this says, but these quotes are taken right out of the ordinance. So again, this will be posted on the website later. This talks a lot about planning for the future and different uses. We want to encourage a mixture of uses, complementary uses, so uses that work well together. Opportunities for public transit that promote multimodal connections at local and regional levels. They need to be designed, with transit in mind or close access to transit. It's a big component. We're looking at pedestrian circulation. We're looking at active transportation, so bicyclists, as well as vehicular circulation. We want to create a complete development with these PDD projects. And really what this is all meaning to say is we want to go above and beyond the minimum requirements of typical zones with these planned development areas. And we want public and private open space, included as one of the benefits of the added development intensity. There's again, one of the trade-offs, for lack of a better phrase, is we want to see open space, we want to see trail connections, we want to see all these things. And again, it is an economic development tool to help facilitate and guide redevelopment of these targeted areas that are identified in city master plans. So I'm going to switch over now. I'm going to go briefly through how this development compares to the PDD standards, the regulations that are in that ordinance, but also just a staff analysis of how this complies with the general plan and the Wasatch master plan. Let me know if you see that switch over. Did you see that page turn?
We do.
Okay. So I'll start here. This document is a review of this proposal as compared to all the minimum development standards in the PDD. I'm not going to read through all of these. This has been on the website and this was shared with the Planning Commission. But the way we approached this when we were reviewing this at the staff level was this kind of color-coded system, so you could see whether the development complied with the standards or didn't. And this didn't start out as green as it is tonight. This is kind of a living document that we use to identify deficiencies or areas that needed to be addressed. But this is where this project is as it has been presented to the council. So these are all the density and the building height standards and the setbacks and kind of the development requirements of the PDD area. And you can see here, the only red one you're going to see is the below market rate or affordable housing provision. And that's only red because it's pending. There's an active application that we'll talk about in just a little bit for a text amendment to that provision. So this is red because it's not filled in at all, and it's pending the outcome of the council decision on that text amendment. It will directly affect this project.
Mike, looking at the PDD and recognizing that the gravel pit is a unique site, it's basically not raw land. Where do we deal with, or when do you look at the reclamation aspects of the scar and the hillside, stuff like that? Is that something that eventually is included to some degree?
Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot more at our sensitive lands meeting, but
Okay. All
basically
right.
phase one of the project, hillside reclamation needs to happen right away because the phase one involves that hillside. So
Okay.
there will be a reclamation plan, and in the written ordinance, we will address how that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Just scrolling through this though, you'll see, in terms of these minimum development requirements, the open space, the landscaping, everything like that. The gray here is not applicable. Basically, it says if a sidewalk is proposed on Wasatch Boulevard, it needs to be at least 8 feet. This particular application is not proposing a sidewalk. So that's gray because it doesn't apply in this case. But you'll see that overall, with the exception of the affordable housing component that will be resolved, this project really does meet all the minimum standards of that PDD ordinance. And again, those are minimum standards. That's a starting point. If it did not comply with some of these, this probably wouldn't be in front of the council at this point. We would have had to go back and address this. But I think this is just helpful to see that, we have worked through the any major issues we had at the beginning of the project, and in staff's determination and the planning commissions, we feel that this does meet all those minimum ordinance standards. So I'll move over to the next one now. And this one is basically a comparison of the application, again, as it is today, not as it was when it started, compared to city master plans, the general plan, the goals of the PDD ordinance. And again, this is a long document, so without reading through it word for word, we've gone through and analyzed the PDD goals and objectives. We do feel that this project does help contribute to the goals of the Plan Development District as it's been designed for the city of Cottonwood Heights. And as we review this, I think it's important to understand in the PDD, in all the PDD eligible areas, we're not necessarily looking for every single goal to be implemented on every single project. I don't think that's realistic. You know, I don't know that was intended for a healthcare facility to be in every single PDD project. So we view these as citywide goals of the Plan Development District tool. That being said, we do find that you know, this project overall does help further the goals of the PDD, and that this is an appropriate use of the PDD on this site. We've got some goals there that are non-applicable, so we've marked those in gray, but you know, no red, nothing stands out here. Again, that's not to say the project started there and it was perfect right out of the gate, and not to say it's even perfect right now, but you know, a lot of work's been put into this and a lot of review by the ARC and the Planning Commission and staff to get it to a point where we feel like it furthers the majority of the goals of the Plan Development District. Again, I encourage anyone following along to read through this more, and you know, this is staff's analysis, and the Planning Commission saw this and I believe agreed based on the way they voted on this, but you know, it's all up for council discussion as well.
So Mike, the areas in yellow that you on our sheets show that you requested additional information. Have you received that additional information?
We have. So I have confirmed a lot of that was justifying that there was appropriate and adequate public facilities to handle this development, and a lot of that looked at was storm drain capacity, the runoff, the water runoff from the site, you know, the added road area. So Public Works and the city engineering team had asked for some more information, and I confirmed that we have received that. They have provided that. So those have been switched over to green at this point. And a lot of this talks about, you know, creative use of the land, you know, more complete development. So it's not developed piecemeal, you know, bit by bit. You know, there's good open space, an appropriate mix of uses, good landscaping, creating a healthy pedestrian environment, open spaces, trails, that kind of thing. So please, if there are any issues as you're reviewing this information, you know, let Tim or I know, and we're happy to sit down and discuss them further with you. This document then gets into the general plan, and you know, the general plan is a big document. So we took out the areas in the general plan that we felt referred specifically or directly to the gravel pit area. And I should state it's the full gravel pit area, not just this 20 acres in the general plan, but you know, we included that analysis in here. You know, and this is from all over the general plan, from you know, opportunities and constraints to future land use. You know, this is saying in here, this is basically a good opportunity for redevelopment. It's a clean slate after the mining use is done. So it provides a big opportunity for the city to create a development that works well for the city. But you can see here, it's a gateway to the city. Many visitors will pass by this site. So we want to be able to, you know, invite visitors to the city into this development. Again, identified as a future mixed use area. The general plan refers to it as a campus or resort type feel, and would cater to interests and needs of Canyon visitors. So potential businesses identified even back in 2005, hotels, restaurants, clubs, coffee shops, you know, art galleries. It references Park City Main Street and some other areas as, you know, maybe examples. We don't know the exact uses yet. We do know there's a hotel proposed and a lot of retail here, and street level retail where we hope you would see that foot traffic. So without knowing exact uses at this point, which I don't know that the developer does either, you know, we feel that this is moving in the right direction towards creating a development that was envisioned in 2005. In citizen comments in the general plan, I'll just touch on this quick. The feedback for the gravel pit area, was a mixed use area that would include retail, residential, and entertainment. Retail shopping area, similar to Gateway or Foothill Village or Park City Main Street. Mixed use, catered around servicing skiing and other canyon users, hotels, apartments, condominiums, restaurants, other retail. An amphitheater, I know that was discussed or brought up at the last meeting. It's not proposed right now, but certainly could be discussed further. This talks about a city center to include city offices. Obviously, that has changed slightly since '05, but mixed use retail housing, again, referenced strongly in that general plan. And then it talks about economic development, just the potential here to capture visitors to the city, or people leaving the canyons, having this site appeal to them to come here rather than go, to a different city to go to a restaurant or a hotel or stay, and capture some of that, that tourism market. So the last section of this document is a comparison of the relevant recommendations in the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan. So one of the policies in that plan is a linear park in the gravel pit, which we do feel is being implemented as the large pedestrian plaza or landscaped area that is over the Metropolitan Water Aqueduct. The gravel pit as a walkable urban place. You do need cars to get to this site. You've got the state highway there, but once you're in the site, we feel the work of the ARC and the Planning Commission to make this more walkable by adding the roundabouts, trail connectivity, the public trail up the hillside, allowing for public parking. We think it's really started to get to that point where it is becoming a very walkable place. There's good plaza connections between all of the uses on the site. So while there are cars on this site, and it's something we're going to keep looking at, we do think there's a lot of amenities here that cater to recreational active transportation users, pedestrians, cyclists, et cetera. Talks about enhanced bus service in the Wasatch Master Plan. We did review this site with UDOT as a potential for public transit. They actually need, just based on their preliminary numbers, they needed more land than is even available on this parcel. So the large parking structure didn't work great here. This does provide a good connection though to the existing park and ride that is to the north in Holiday City. And there will be strict requirements for clear connectivity to the southern gravel pit piece as that comes online. We've referenced some things about Wasatch Boulevard that don't.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, yeah.
Is there going to be a UTA bus stop at the facility though in the interim? If this were to be built before the south end?
I think we could talk about that. It's not proposed right now. I don't think any transit public parking is proposed at this point. There's public parking, but it's kind of just trail usage. Potentially that public parking, people could walk over to the park and ride. But
pretty long walk with your skis though.
It is, yeah.
Okay, I just would like you to flag that because this proposal won't get my vote unless we have some kind of a UTA stop. But does the Canyon Center have a UTA stop now? I know it did, then it didn't. Does it now?
It does not.
Okay, my point exactly. Thank you.
Okay. So I won't go through these in particular, but reading through the policies in the Wasatch Master Plan, it does talk a lot about focusing in the full Wasatch Boulevard area, focusing the development at the gravel pit and limiting commercial redevelopment away from the rest of the Wasatch Boulevard corridor. That was a clear recommendation we heard from the Planning Commission, from the council, and particularly from the public that was engaged in that process. What was presented there is if we limit commercial development along the corridor, even small scale development, we would emphasize slightly higher intensity or density at the gravel pit site. Again, it talks about mixed use, it talks about walkability, it talks about sharing parking and consolidating uses like that, which we feel this does pretty well. So again, this is here. I don't want to read through this word for word. I'll put everyone to sleep, I think. But again, this is on the webpage. This was presented and shared with the Planning Commission, and just from how those discussions went, I believe they agreed that, you know, the project in its form right now is compatible with a majority of the applicable city policies that govern this site that have been adopted, you know, from 2005 to even last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, with the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan. So we feel this project is definitely really in the right direction in terms of meeting city master plan goals and priorities. And I will say we used a lot of these policies as we were meeting with the applicant early on, to demonstrate the types of things we'd be looking for in this development. And I think it really guided this, you know, the process to get to a point where, you know, a lot of it does comply with these policy level goals. So those policies and adopted plans were very helpful in this process. So I'll go back to the slide now. That's all I have prepared for tonight, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, for any questions.
Yeah, real quickly. First, I want to echo Christine's flagging of UTA with the county's park and ride on that northwest corner, which is pretty good size. I think at least needs to be discussed and understand how going forward there is a relationship with UTA, both with the EIS is coming along that same route and everything else. So it definitely is something we need to discuss further. There's no question about that. Now I'm looking at our agenda. We have two other major items, but to the council, tonight's was just introduction of ordinances and policy regarding PDD. We'll really get into meat of some things going forward. But if there's something you have in addition to the UTA stop, flagging that, along with things we added in our last meeting, you know, I'd encourage you to share those right now with Mike, because we want to make sure we do our due diligence and really look at this. It's a true opportunity to have an impact on our community in the right way with that first phase of the gravel pit development. So comments, questions before we move on in our agenda?
Doug, you're on mute.
Let's do that again. Originally, obviously, we're talking about the north end right now. What the south end is, tell me the timeline on the south end. How many years would that be?
I don't think we have an exact idea. Basically, they're at the very southern piece of that, mining out, you know, the remaining material there. But a lot of the processing equipment is on the north side of that southern property. So it's as fast as that's mined out that will continue in that operation. You know, we've heard anything from 2 or 3 years to 8 or 9 years, and we just don't know.
So without any stop there as far as UTA or anything, that would be way down the line, it sounds like.
Potentially, yeah.
Well, we have to understand too that part of the EIS process is enhanced bus services. And I think it's pretty clear that whatever alternative they choose, UDOT chooses, there's going to have to be some level of busing. More so on the interim basis, maybe less in the long run, but busing and UTA is going to be fundamental, whatever goes forward. So it's just something we need to make sure that it's looked at appropriately. And with that major park and ride on the northwest corner across the street right there from this site, it seems like there's a bus stop right in front of that already. If I remember.
Yeah, there should be. I was going to ask you that. You know, that parcel, it seems.
Yeah.
It would seem too close to have two transit bus stops at the south end and across the street.
But either way, as Christine mentioned, it needs to be flagged and needs to make sure we understand it thoroughly, both in this site and going forward to that whole corridor. It's a critical piece, yeah.
So I have a quick question, Mike. How is the Ivory Home development going that we approved for PDD?
They're working through a floodplain permit with FEMA right now. So they've been doing a lot of engineering work with FEMA before they come back to us. They have the first phase has been reviewed. It's ready to issue. So it's ready to begin whenever they want to start. But they're working through this FEMA process first.
So, I mean, I think it might be helpful, I'm speaking for Doug, Councilmember Peterson here, since he wasn't part of it, but it might be interesting to see what was started there and what we approved, just for context, because what I'm feeling myself internally is that in a mixed use, I think it said up to 45 feet. And this can, which is about, I don't know, 5 stories. And this, now we're being asked to approve something that's 13 stories. That's, you know, that's almost threefold. When I hear through, and when I think of we're giving, you know, we're creating an opportunity for somebody to develop a piece of property 3 times what it's allowed to do under the current zoning. And I hear you comment, well, they did pretty well, right, at this piece. They did pretty well at this piece. I want to hear you as a staff say, wow, this was amazing what they did. They really surprised me, right, with what they did. Because when I look at the drawings, you know, I'm from New Jersey, and it looks like something I saw when I lived there when I was 20. You know, like where I'm looking for something like, oh my gosh, this is a gravel pit. You know, I can't even see cars from the road. People are walking through it. And when I look at it, I still see, in my mind, I still see lots of cars. It's very car centric. So I don't know. I just think if we're giving somebody the opportunity to go big, and we all wanted to go be big, right? Because we love the tax revenues as a city. We could fix our roads and stormwater. So tax revenues are great, I guess, right? But I also think if we're giving somebody,
good agree. I'm not gonna.
But if we're going to give a lot, you know, let's, and that's my legacy. That's the mayor's, that's our legacy. That's what we're leaving behind when we leave this office. I want to be able to leave behind, say, oh, we've saved some open space. Look at the gravel pit. That development is cool. The Rockworth group did a great job in Holiday. You know, I visited, I frequent some of the establishments nearby. Like that's really cool. So how do we replicate that? I'm seeing, yeah, they did pretty good. They did pretty well, but like, I'm just still struggling. And just that transit thing is troublesome to me. If you think about how many residents will end up living there in terms of the condos and everything else, I mean, it's a significant number of people and a missed opportunity. If you can't just have one UTA bus come and go right up Big Cottonwood Canyon, or, you know, bus rapid transit or whatever it is, if we're not integrating that now, we're gonna miss it, right? It's gone. So.
No, good.
I-
Go ahead, Mike.
Just a few points. I think what would be helpful is as we continue to be able to quantify, you know, what you feel it's missing, what you'd like to see, and we can get a response from all of that. You know, I think by showing those documents, the amount of green there was, maybe I should rephrase, staff feels like with the exception of the few pieces we talked about, like the affordable housing provision, this fully complies with the, you know, the goals and the objectives, not only of the ordinance, but of the Wasatch Master Plan, which this council, minus Councilmember Peterson, voted on. This really matches the vision for development in this area. Now, there are certainly aspects of it that are up for discussion, and that's why it's at the council, and that's the council's role. But this site has been called for as a mixed use with high density, with walkability, and if we can help show those things and the applicant can help address those things, that's great. But we do feel like it's done a very good job of complying with all of these master plan goals and objectives and policies. And like I said, it didn't necessarily start that way. We showed them that list of master plan references from day one and said, you're going to have to meet these, otherwise you're not going to get our recommendation. And the fact that it got staff's recommendation and a 6-to-1 planning commission recommendation, I think that means that it did a very good job of complying with all of those, at least in our findings. And now it's the council's turn to do the same thing.
Well, and over the next few meetings, we'll be able to get a better feel and understanding of what some of those intricate pieces are when it comes to height, when it comes to trails, when we talk about UTA, and in the sensitive lands piece, which is very important. So again, Mike, you know, we appreciate your efforts and months of work. And this is a great start. You've given some information. Now our duty is to look and see how this fits into what we as a council envision for this area of our city. You know, looking at everything from the hillside, the connectivity to Holiday, our own connectivity, transportation, And as it meshes with Big Cottonwood Corporate, that whole feel all the way through there. So great start. Appreciate the efforts and appreciate the questions. Please, even after this meeting, if you have some specifics, send to Mike, and we'll bring back answers now going forward specifically to those things. And we flagged another one today with some of those we flagged last time. I'm going to move us forward on the agenda because
I'm sorry, I just have 3 things I want to just check off because I might not remember to send the email. I want to make sure that our Dark Skies initiative applies to this building. I also feel like we had a wonderful architect that had done some renditions of the gravel pit. I think we all were interviewed maybe a year or so ago. And then I thought there were other renditions of the gravel pit even before that. If you could send those to me again, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I can send any renderings that have been done.
Christine, you said something about a project that was done on Holiday by the same group. I guess refresh my memory exactly what one that is. I'm over there quite a bit. So
That's Holiday's Town Center where the Harmons is.
okay. All right. Well, I mean, I certainly am familiar with it. I would see some differences here, but that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking in the right place.
There are obviously differences. I'm just saying that seemed like a very cohesive effort with Holiday and their city center. I just would hate to see us.
Yeah, I would disagree with that, considering the amount of litigation and the number of years and the iterations they had to go through to get there. It certainly wasn't a smooth process, but that's a different discussion. We can, but I just wanted to make sure I was online with where you would reference. Thanks.
okay, thank you. Interesting conversation. All right. Any further comments, questions, feedback to Mike as we move forward? All right, thanks again, Mike. We have 2 more items on our agenda. I'd like to be able to get through those if possible. If not, we may have to come back. The item C on your staff reports is the parking permit ordinance modification. As you know, we have approved a new ordinance for above Wasatch Boulevard regarding the trailhead. And we were limited in some things, and Mike was going to bring us back some modifications. I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Yeah, this one's really quick. The concerns that were raised and the direction we had from the council was regarding the issuance of guest permits in these areas. The way the council or the ordinance reads now is every time you have a guest, you have to come get a new guest permit, which the concern was brought up. That's very valid that, you know, what if this is on weekends or after hours or an impromptu visit? You know, it's going to be hard to do that. So this proposal only tries to clarify that section, and basically what it says is each residence that gets permanent parking passes will be given 2 guest tags to use for temporary guests to the area, and then, you know, that it has to be used for guests. You know, the privilege can't be abused, and we can enforce it if we find out that it is. But basically, the only change is rather than request guest ordinance, if you're in an area, you'd be issued 2 to use, you know, whenever you have visitors, regardless of the time or day or who the visitors are.
Any questions regarding this proposal? I know it's an area of concern I had and supported the idea of residents being able to have something they can put on a review mirror or it can give to a guest rather than something permanently attached to a car.
I guess my question would be, the 2 makes some sense, certainly, because that's typically what you would have available in front of your own home. You also obviously have your driveway. I guess the question becomes, you know, have we made any allowances for someone to be able to get an extra one? Or I guess I would think, well, you know, if I've got 3 kids and they all come over, then which one doesn't get to park anywhere near? Because this is a 24/7 resident parking permit area, correct? And so do they have to borrow them from their neighbors, or do we move the number to 3? Or that's kind of what I'm questioning right now.
springboarding off what Councilmember Bracken has said, it seems to me that we want to avoid anybody being able to, or any sort of market in these passes arising. So we may want to make sure that the permits are not transferable, which would go to, an issue that Councilmember Bracken has raised. Whether there's a replacement cost if somebody comes in to replace one that they've lost, to cover our staff time, whether we are somehow putting numbers on these permits so that when one is lost or terminated, why we can terminate that number on our records before we issue a replacement. Seems to me that these parking passes in this restricted area may become kind of hot commodities potentially. So we may want to do a few things or allow staff to adopt rules and regulations intended to limit their use just for the intended purpose of the residents, benefiting the residents who actually live there.
Shane, I think those are good points, and I've seen that actually happen. University of Utah with permitted parking for events that people actually market and share those and sell those and things like that. So any ways to control this for its intended purpose, I think, is the right direction. Question.
Yeah, we can add that language. The way we do this right now is the permits would be assigned to a specific address with contact info, and then would be numbered. So we would be able to track and go out and see the number on the permit and know which house that belongs to. But we can add a note that it's not non-transferable. I think the 2 guest permits came from some of the citizen comments saying, when the original area was created, they were each given 2 passes to use. We can change that. We can add, that additional permits are allowed upon request. We can kind of go any direction with that.
Comments from the council? I'm just talking kind of generally.
I think having 2 in the house, then you can give to a visitor to use temporarily, then get back. There does need to be a way to replace it. That probably involves some small cost as well. Being able, as Shane said, being able to terminate a number that has been lost or whatever has moved on, and then so that there's just that current amount. And if 2 is the number that was working before, then maybe it works fine. If it becomes an issue, we can have residents come and say, well, it would really be nicer if it was 3. But I mean, that was just concerns I have. I guess I'm a little bit sensitive to it because if this were my parents' house, because I go over there regularly to see them and care for them and feed them and whatnot, and they don't have a regular driveway to park in. I'm one of those. I would be on the road all the time, and so I guess that's why I just want to make sure that what we have works and it works the way that it intends, especially with this being a 24/7 restricted parking area.
But again,
go ahead, Mayor.
Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
I went up there just recently. Obviously, it is the low season up there. There weren't a lot of people that live there parking on the streets. Obviously, that's going to be very variable with holidays and events and things like that. I did notice the direction from the North Street, because I know Quicksilver's had a lot of people driving up and then getting lost and getting frustrated and then racing out. But from the north end, the trail was very well marked as far as the signage. Now, farther south, that may be another item that I needed to go look at. But we do have very limited space up there at the top. There's the parallel, I'm sorry, I guess we're going to make them ADA or whatever at the top, and then there's some that are parallel on the road. But it is never going to be a completely the silver bullet to fix this or to maintain it in high season. And I think we ought to try the 2 and see if there is demand for more. But I think transferring them could turn into a very difficult situation to monitor.
But I think if we just have two and they're numbered, and the other important thing is that they are of the quality that they're not easily duplicated. Other entities I know have done this, and they could just go to a high-powered or high-efficiency copy machine and could duplicate numerous of them and pass them out. So there just has to be an effort to somehow control that if possible, but I don't think it'll be a major issue, yeah.
Usually a hologram or something like that is part of what they do to
Yeah.
mitigate the ease of, obviously anything can be duplicated, but.
Well, you're the expert in that, so you can guide us.
Yeah, these would be plastic. They're like plastic window hangers, but I believe the ones we've ordered have the city logo on them, which can't be used improperly or without consent. Yeah, we'd have to prove that, but we would track all the numbers on these as well.
Okay, Mike, well, I think you got some feedback. I maybe tweak that language a little bit. I'm not hearing any objection to proceeding with this to then be a part of what we've passed in our previous meetings on that restricted parking up there. Any last comment?
I think we need to, I think we definitely need to move to this way of handling it as opposed to what we currently have in code. So we can take another stab at the new language and then hopefully get it implemented.
Okay, any final comments? Christine, that's your area. Any thoughts, concerns?
No, I'm okay. Thanks, Doug, for providing some insights after being up there.
All right, let's move on the agenda, and hopefully if we can handle this one in 15 minutes, it'll be on schedule. If not, we'll have to come back after, and that's regarding the PDD text amendment, affordable housing update. We've talked about this a couple times, and we have a recommendation from staff, but Michael, have you kind of go through that quickly if possible. If not, we'll carry on.
Yeah, not a lot of changes since the last time we presented this or discussed it. And I will say this, this is the same applicant as the PDD development. So if we need to bring this back at another work session, I don't know that there's a huge hurry there, other than we want to continue making progress on it. So this is just a proposed text amendment to the Pdd Ordinance that would apply to every PDD project moving forward, not just this one, or not just the gravel pit one. This is a history of kind of where this started and where it is now. The applicant originally proposed just changing the affordability from 50% area median income to 80%. The original proposal was not to require any additional units, the same 10% of units in a project, just affordable at 80% instead of 50. 80%, as we've discussed, is a more commonly referred to benchmark of affordability. It's kind of it's what HUD uses, it's what the state, the county all use to define affordable housing, which means it's easier to finance and to factor into development costs. The initial staff recommendation, rather than the 10% of units, we felt there should be a trade-off. If the units are 80% AMI, that there should be additional units. We didn't know what the right number was, so when we took this to Planning Commission, we proposed somewhere between 15 to 20%. And I will state from a June 2020 draft of the city-initiated PDD amendment, which was just introduced to Planning Commission and will come to the council in the next couple months. It will not apply to the gravel pit, but will apply moving forward. We're recommending 15% of units in a project be 80% AMI. So this was drafted and done and just kind of sitting on hold since before this text amendment application came in. So we felt comfortable with 15% units at 80% AMI originally, and we still do. The Planning Commission voted, but they recommended 20% of units be provided at 80% AMI. And then if you provide units at a higher or a more affordable rate, so 50% AMI or 30%, there's flexibility to reduce the number of units in a project that are affordable. And that would be up to the discretion recommendation of the commission and the city council. Based on that, the applicant, stated that for their project, there would be challenges in privately financing 20% of the units at 80% AMI, but they did revise their proposal to propose a minimum of 15% of units in any project be affordable at or below 80% area median income. So that's where it is today, and we've done some additional research. Staff still recommends approval of this and finds it reasonable. It allows the city to further achieve our affordable housing goals. 80% AMI is still affordable, and there is the option to decrease that area median income to a very low income rate of 50 or 30% AMI and reduce the requirement for the number of units. So that will still be built in. But this, the proposed amendment allows us to achieve and implement our affordable housing master plan. We feel it's also a reasonable requirement of these PDD developments where you get often more dense, higher intensity multifamily components. And we feel that, the trade-off of allowing higher density and more units is, 15% of those units being 80% AMI is appropriate and reasonable for them to provide their share of affordable units in the city based on the number of units, especially at these gravel pit sites. Based on staff research, research of other cities, we've talked to some lending institutions and HUD, and it's by no means scientific research, but we got some pretty good information and feedback. 50% AMI units are difficult to fund, especially in larger projects without public subsidy. Where you see those in other places, there's often tax increment funds or other subsidies being implemented. And as a project gets bigger, when you get too far above 15% of units in a project, depending on where you are, obviously, it becomes harder to privately finance that many affordable units, even at the 80% AMI. So it's not an exact science, but we do feel that 15% units at 80% AMI is a reasonable way for a PDD development to provide their share of affordable housing in the community. And is also kind of a, more or less a sweet spot of being able to provide those units with little or no public subsidy and still be able to make those projects work from their pro forma perspective. The trade-off there is, we feel this is a good sweet spot, what's being proposed. That doesn't mean that it needs to be approved, but 50% AMI or a larger percentage of units will likely result in us receiving requests for public subsidies to contribute to these. And while we're working on a CRA in this area, in all the areas affected by the PDD, we don't have that yet. So there's no mechanism in place today. And finally, we feel that this requirement, based on what other cities require, is reasonable and fair. Well, that's what I have. Again, it's not much different than last time. The applicant is set at what's being proposed here. So they do not want to change their proposed amendment beyond that 15% of units. So this is what the council will be considering when this is brought forward for action. It'll be approval or denial of 15% of units in a project at 80% AMI.
I guess we have to accept the way that it was proposed that way at all. We can't amend our own ordinance to say what we would like it to say. Is that what is that, or am I maybe I'm missing something, but
so I think this is an applicant initiated proposal. So the council needs to consider this one as proposed. Like I said, though, there will be an amendment coming forward after the gravel pit process for the whole PDD. Unless the planning commission recommends otherwise, it's going to come forward with the same recommendation, but the council could then modify it at that point because that is a city initiated amendment.
Okay, so this one that says 20% of units at 80% is the city initiated version of it?
No, sorry, the 20% was the planning commission's recommendation.
On this proposal.
One is this little bullet right here that that is 15% at 80% AMI.
Yeah, maybe I'll need to have a talk offline with Shane or something. That seems, or I'm not understanding exactly what it is, but I mean, because the commission voted 6-1 to put 20% at 80. And I mean, and I personally, I lean toward that. I guess the other thing to possibly consider, and Shane might have to opine on this, was whether we could put in that range. Maybe it is a 15 to 20%. And if the applicant is interested in hitting the 15%, then they find something else in the PDD zone. Maybe it's a transit stop. Maybe it's something else that is appealing enough to the council that's, or, you know, and to the planning commission that says, okay, yeah, we're fine with letting you go with the minimum on that one because you're going to be doing this other thing. I'm thinking kind of off the top of my head. So, but that's, I don't know if, it seems like the PDD zone recommendations may be flexible enough to add a range in there. I don't know if that's possible or not. Shane would have to let us know, or maybe you do, Mike. But
Well, I think at a minimum, the applicant would need to be willing to amend their proposal, and we could bring them back and have them in the discussion with the council at some point if you want that. You know, we just, again, this applies to every PDD, but looking at the Rockworth piece, this 10% of units based on their proposal is 40%. The 15% of units is 63 affordable units that, you know, that we would see at that particular site. So that's it's a good share of affordable units. And again, we think it's reasonable based on that impact and the development intensity.
So
Mike, oh,
Go ahead, Doug. I was just going to turn it over to
I'm
you.
just going to say real quick, whenever you say 15 to 20% of the units, the 80, you know, AMI, the developer's always going to go to 15, right?
Yeah, I think if that was just a range, we didn't recommend actually adopting a range, but that's where we started with the planning commission. And the developer or the applicant came, you know, they changed their proposal and they were willing to say, okay, we can do 15%. And they did state either to the council or the planning commission that for their particular project, they could privately finance 15% units at 80% AMI, which I think is beneficial to the city where we don't have that public subsidy mechanism in place at this point.
Well, the question to the council.
When would a TIF occur on this project if that does occur? Would that be after this is all said and done?
I'm not sure on the timeline. We have not, you know, we're still in the process of scheduling meetings with the taxing entities. So that's a little ways out still.
And
I'm sorry, what I guess I missed that. Are they coming to us for a TIF?
No, they're not proposing that. If there's a CRA, anyone in the area could, but Rockworth has not indicated that. And right now they can't because there's no CRA.
But they could put together their own plan area, couldn't they, and survey area and propose it to us?
they could, but it still has to go through that same process with all the taxing entities, which is going to take quite some time.
Of course. So I don't know. It seems like we're getting the horse before the cart, if that's going to come up.
Okay, the question to the council, I think, is, you know, we have a staff recommendation. Would you like further discussion? I don't think this is time sensitive. I think we could bring it back if you like, or if the council is ready to take a position. So council members, would you like to discuss this further going forward?
I wouldn't mind a clarification from Shane on, I apologize, and I should probably know better than anyone why we couldn't make that adjustment. If it needs to be a straight up or down, then I'm fine with understanding. I just need to be told that. The other part of it is, I guess if they're looking to strictly private finance and not doing any type of a TIF, then I might be able to be convinced that 15% is a better number than 20. But that's kind of that's why I asked the question. I was like, well, because Mike has said over and over, private financing, private financing, private financing. You know, maybe if our goal is 20%, then that means we need to be more willing to do a TIF. That's a council decision, but yes, I'd like at least one more shot at those 2 points.
But even if they want to propose a TIF, it still has to come back to the school district, to us and all the other entities. We'd have to feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they may
So-
want to avoid that. And if that's the case, and the 15% is the only way that that can be done, then, I mean, I'm willing to listen to that argument, but,
Well, I'm hearing from Scott, you'd like a little bit further discussion. Christine, Doug?
I'd like clarification on the 15 to 20. And then I know we go by historical, historically what other cities do, but each project on the PDD is individual. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, this would change the baseline requirement for every PDD though. And that's what we're trying to communicate here is there's trade-offs. If we go above 15%, that's fine. That certainly helps us achieve affordable housing goals, but we're more likely to see, requests for public subsidies. And if we go less than 80% AMI, we kind of get to the same thing. And where we don't have a CRA in place and any guarantee that the taxing entities will approve that, there's a little risk with that approach, we feel.
Yeah, for the council's information, I'm personally supportive of the Planning Commission and the staff for their homework and what they've done. I think it allows us to still maintain a positive direction to affordable housing. And this is just one of many tools we'll be using in the future. But again, don't feel an urgency to approve anything right now. So I'm hearing from Scott and Doug of bringing back for a little bit more discussion. Christine, some specific questions you'd like to deal with going forward?
I'm leaning towards supporting the Planning Commission decision. That's where I am at today, but I'm open to other perspectives and education still.
So, Mike, let's bring back this one more time with those couple of questions from Scott and Doug for a little bit of clarification, and maybe from Shane, and it should be pretty straightforward.
yeah, I agree with Christine. I lean towards the Planning Commission, which is a 20%, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, there may be something else, like Christine suggested, maybe dropping that requirement from 20 to 15 would work if there was some other aspect of the PDD that was more attractive. I don't know. So, but I mean, my gut initially is saying I'm leaning toward the Planning Commission asked for.
Doug, you're muted.
Part of the beauty of the PDD is a give and take. I do think that the things that I saw down on the ICO project, we did get setbacks that were increased. We did get a walking trail. We did get different things it was a back and forth trade. Even if some people did not like anything there, we did have, I think, some positive influences from the PDD zone.
All right, thank you, everyone. I think we'll bring this back. I think we're real close. A couple good comments, and if you'll keep those notes, and Mike, with the final discussion on our next meeting, hopefully we'll be able to come to a consensus and move forward. Okay, with that being said, go ahead, Scott.
So that's perfect time. It's 7 o'clock. We need to get on to our meeting. Are you gonna ask for a motion to close this meeting and adjourn to our business meeting?
It's been moved by Councilor Bracken. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Then seconded by Councilmember Peterson. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, adjourn, and we'll reconvene in about 3 minutes if we can for our business meeting. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you in a minute.